Greetings fellow tank commanders. In this video I'm going to be showing you a game that I played in the heavy metal hero ISU-130. This is a tier 8 Soviet premium tank destroyer with regular matchmaking. This great game will also allow me to review this tank for you. The game I'm playing is an assault battle on Dukla Pass with tier 9 as the top tier and 1 artillery on each team. Now while I move into a defensive position, I'm going to talk about this tank's mobility. It has a top speed of 38 km per hour and a horsepower to rate ratio of only 11.09, with a track traverse speed of 28 degrees per second. This mobility definitely isn't anything to brag about, but it's enough for what you'll be doing with this tank. On maps like Westfield, where you have to climb large steep slopes, you'll start to notice the slight mobility disadvantages which this tank has. So make sure you know where you're going before the game starts, that way you don't waste any time. But on most maps you shouldn't have a problem getting in a sniping position before the enemy scouts arrive. Now moving on to this tank's survivability. The bulk of its armor on its front and sides are only 90mm thick and barely angled. So if you end up blocking a shot, it's just luck, so don't try to work this into your strategy. You also only have 1,000 hit points, which isn't great, but it's definitely not the worst for a tier 8 tank destroyer. You're going to want to avoid taking hits for as long as possible until absolutely necessary, because with that weak armor and mediocre hit points, the enemy will wear you down very quickly. The main thing to help keep the ISU-130 alive is to stay out of sight. It's got a concealment value of 47, which is nothing overpowered, but it's still fairly good. Having a camouflage net and a crew with some camouflage skills will definitely help you stay out of sight longer and therefore keep you alive longer. The most significant part of the ISU-130 is its 130mm gun. It varies from most of the guns that you'll find in World of Tanks, because its premium ammunition, instead of having increased penetration, deals more damage. The AP rounds deal an average of 490 damage, while the premium AP rounds deal an average of 570. When you combine this with its high rate of fire of 5.83 rounds per minute, which is about 10.3 seconds on the reload, this becomes a very devastating gun. That gives it a damage per minute of about 2,850 with its AP rounds, and about 3,320 damage per minute with the premium AP rounds. Now those numbers are just for the stock tank, that's not adding any equipment or premium consumables. My tank currently only has the tank gun rammer to influence its reload time, and it's already under 8.5 seconds. So if you decide to add extra combat rations, or substitute your camouflage net for improved ventilation, then your damage per minute starts to become ridiculously high for a tier 8 tank destroyer. This extra damage on the premium ammunition comes at a cost though, since it only has 187mm of penetration, which means that they're going to have trouble penetrating the front of tier 8 heavy tanks or anything more armored. But the news gets even worse because the penetration on the regular AP rounds isn't that great to begin with. It has only 215mm of penetration, which is well below average for a tier 8 tank destroyer. Before I get into how to compensate for this lack of penetration, I'll quickly mention that the aim time of this gun is 2.1 seconds and that its accuracy is 0.37. These are some pretty solid stats for a tier 8 tank destroyer using this size of caliber. The fast aim time is particularly important to note because the ISU-130 has a very small gun traverse arc, which means that you're going to have to reposition quite frequently, but that aim time definitely helps make up for it. And if you add an enhanced gun laying drive, it becomes only a slight inconvenience then. Success with the ISU-130 ends up coming down to getting around your lack of penetration in order to make use of your phenomenal damage per minute. Even though you have a reliable accuracy and aim time, they're still not going to help you make up for the lack of penetration when you're having to fight at great distances, which is what you'll be doing mostly with this sniper tank. In order to counter these problems, you either have to select weak targets to shoot at, which isn't always a possibility, or you have to be patient and wait for tougher targets to overextend, or make a mistake and show you the sides of their tanks. There are two main parts to doing this. One is having extreme patience to wait for the enemy to make their move and then respond to it, and the second is map positioning. Staying far back and unspotted isn't always the best way to take advantage of this tank. Try to position yourself off to the flanks a little bit so that you have a better chance to get a shot on the enemy's side. You're not going to be able to target small weak spots on the enemy from the distance that you're going to be fighting at. So it's very important that you don't waste your limited ammo capacity trying to hit cupolas or lower plate weak spots at a distance of 400 to 500 meters. Most of the time you're just better off setting an ambush for the enemy and let your teammates bait them around corners or over hills. Or when dealing with ridgeline fighters, wait until they turn their turrets sideways, even though the penetration is lacking. These strategies help make the ISU-130 a reliable damage dealer, even in Tier 10 games. You're better off holding your fire for a little bit, so that you don't give away your position, and that'll encourage the enemies to overextend around cover. Now, one of the main components of playing this tank is knowing when to use which shell. Because the premium AP rounds have such low penetration, you're not going to be able to use them when shooting at tougher tanks head-on. Anything that's a tier 8 heavy tank or tougher, you're going to want to use your regular AP rounds to shoot at them from the front. Don't be greedy and go for the extra damage. It's more important to be a reliable damage dealer for your team, and since you only have 25 shells in your tank, you really can't afford to be bouncing multiple shots off the enemy. I will admit that so far this game I have not been using the shell types to the best of their abilities. I've missed out on quite a bit of damage by shooting at soft targets with the regular AP rounds. But I never get too concerned about this, because those regular AP rounds still do a respectable amount of damage. And since this tank can do such a large amount of damage in a short period of time, you really only need 2 minutes of your gun being fully active in order to make a significant impact on the game. I want to quickly mention the 2 HE rounds that I have supplied in this tank. Although you may hesitate to use your limited shell capacity on them, it's far better to shoot 1 or 2 of these HE rounds at a weak health hull down T29 for example, than using 4 or 5 shells to try to target a small cupola weak spot. And of course they're always good to have around in case you run into a Waffenträger off E100. The game's been pretty close so far, but my team has now managed to grasp a good advantage. There's only a low health E75 and an artillery piece remaining. I was fairly confident that with the E75's low hit points that I could take him out with a regular AP round, and I didn't want to switch over to my premium AP rounds to risk an unlucky bounce, which I find quite common when you're making rush shots during an assault move with this tank. Most of the time you're going to find it worth it to wait that extra second until your gun is aimed. This ended up being a pretty big mistake on my part, because the E75 still has over 500 hit points, so I would have had my premium ammunition in order to take him down. But still, my move had its usefulness because I managed to take a huge chunk out of the E75 and made him an easy target for my teammates to finish off. Now, just a little side note about using the ISU-130, because I've mentioned that you need to snipe, be patient, and ambush with this tank. But you still need to be mindful of the tactical situation. If you're on a flank where your teammates are vastly outnumbering the enemy, don't just sit in the back and camp. Although the ideal situation for this tank is playing passively, there's no reason why you can't support an assault move. Just wait for the enemy to be distracted, and then just roll around cover to get some easy damage. Don't underestimate how much of an impact one shot from this tank can have, especially if you're only in a tier 8 game. Now let's check the post-game stats and see how I did. For this game I earned almost 170,000 silver without any multipliers, and I used my large repair kit. The heavy metal hero ISU-130 has an awesome 60% silver earning bonus, which means that it's not going to be uncommon to earn 100,000 silver in a game. I earned 6,318 experience with the 2 times daily multiplier, and the 15% XP earning bonus which this tank has definitely helped out with this. In this game I dealt 5,440 damage, assisted with 1,565 damage, and destroyed 2 enemy vehicles. This earned me high caliber and mastery badge first class. That's a solid damage output for this tank, and the assisted damage from my convenient positioning definitely helped. I placed at the top of my team, earning a base XP of 2006. It's nice to see that most of the players on both teams made a good impact on the game. I managed to hit 13 of my 15 shots and penetrate 11 of those. This gun is not always going to prove to be this reliable, but for this game I was able to fight from an ideal position and distance. For crew and module damage this game, I hit the ammo rack in the Centennial, destroyed the engine in the WT off Panzer IV, and destroyed the engine in the E-75. Now to answer the big question, is this tank worth buying? Yes it is, but only for players looking for a specific addition to their garage. The heavy metal hero ISU-130 plays extremely passive. As you were able to see in this game, it took several minutes before I was able to see any real action with the tank. This is not uncommon for this style of tank. This is not a good tank for players who are looking for a fast-paced game, since you're going to be most effective repelling enemy attacks and sniping them from a concealed position. The lack of penetration on the 130mm cannon can be hard to compensate for, but for players looking for that slower paced passive game style, this is a really good tank to consider, because it's a very challenging tank destroyer to use but has extremely high potential. Under ideal circumstances, the ISU-130 performs extremely well. If you let the enemy overextend and unleash the full power of your 130mm cannon, you'll see the hit points just start to fly off the enemy, and in a very short period of time you can have a humongous impact on the game. When buying this tank, you should also consider the Su-130Y, which is a Tier 6 Soviet premium tank destroyer. It also has a 130mm cannon, which has the higher damage premium AP rounds. Its performance is similar to this tank, just at a Tier 6 level, and because of that lower tier, it might be more appropriate for players who are unfamiliar with this type of game style. But if you're looking for a passive game style with an interesting challenge, the ISU-130 will surely put your skills to the test, and if you succeed, you'll be rewarded with huge amounts of damage and mountains of silver. The heavy metal hero ISU-130 can be bought through a mega bundle for the month of April 2017 at 30,000 gold. This is very expensive, but it has all three of the heavy metal heroes, which each have some extremely interesting game styles to play. It's ideal for an experienced player looking to add some unusual tanks to their garage. This heavy metal hero can also be bought through individual packages from April 7th to 14th, from 12,850 gold to 14,620. Well, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed the game with the heavy metal hero ISU-130, and that the review will help you decide whether this is a good tank for your garage. Stay tuned for more awesome World of Tanks videos.
Ooh,